Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a frustration that, let's be real, pretty much every single learner has wrestled with at some point. Our goal here is absolutely crucial. We're going to completely shift your approach from that passive, endless reading loop into a highly structured study system that actually aligns with how your brain works. We're going to break down the real science of learning and show you exactly why just studying harder is actually the worst way to go about it. Simply put, it is time to study smarter. Okay, I want you to be completely honest with me for a second. Have you ever felt like you studied for hours, just sitting there at your desk, putting in all this time and effort, but then when it actually matters, your mind just goes totally blank? It's literally like a computer crashing right in the middle of a final exam. If that happens to you, I really want to assure you right now, you are not lazy, you are not broken, and you are certainly not smart enough. You're just suffering from a system failure. You've been relying on habits that honestly were never actually designed to help your brain learn in the first place. So, to fix this, we're drawing directly from a super fascinating book called How to Study Like a Genius by Shadow. We're going to use this as our ultimate guide to finally ditching those bad, overly comfortable habits and replacing them with highly actionable, entirely science-backed learning techniques. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about IQ at all. It's all about method. All right, here is our roadmap for today, which should help keep things nice and organized. First, the real study problem. Second, how the brain learns. Third, study mistakes to avoid. Fourth, the Genius Study System. And finally, fifth, your 7-day reset plan. Okay, let's jump right into part one, the real study problem. We really need to diagnose exactly why the familiar study habits you've probably relied on for years are fundamentally broken. You see, most of us completely confuse time spent with actual learning done. It is such a classic trap. You can sit there with a book open for 5 hours, rereading your notes, feeling incredibly busy, and yet retain almost nothing. Why? Because learning is not measured by duration. It's measured by understanding and recall. A heavily focused 1-hour session using the right methods is always going to beat 5 hours of passive busy work. And that brings us to this stark contrast between comfort and growth. Passive studying, things like rereading a chapter over and over or highlighting literally every other sentence, feels really good, doesn't it? It feels safe. It feels familiar. But here's the harsh truth. That comfort is actively destroying your memory. Your brain just looks at the text and goes, oh yeah, I've seen this before. But recognizing something is definitely not the same as recalling it. True growth, active studying, only happens when your brain is actually challenged. Moving right along to part two, how the brain learns. If we want to study like a genius, we have to actually align with our own biology. Think of your working memory as your brain's immediate workspace, and the truth is, it is shockingly small. When you try to cram the night before a huge test, you are totally overloading this capacity. The source text uses this brilliant analogy. Cramming is basically like trying to pour a high-pressure fire hose into a leaky bucket. When you overload your brain like that, it naturally drops information just to protect itself. All that hard work? It just falls right out. So instead of cramming one topic for hours on end, advanced learners use a psychological concept called interleaving. Basically, instead of studying one single subject for 2 hours straight, you mix it up. You study some history, then you switch over to math, and then maybe back to history. Doing this actually forces your brain to constantly differentiate and build stronger, much deeper neural connections. Challenging your brain with varied engagement like this makes forgetting much harder. All right, part three, study mistakes to avoid. Let's blitz through these 7 memory killers really quick. Rereading and over-highlighting, they keep you completely passive. Long hours in cramming, we just learned that totally overloads your working memory. Multitasking will brutally fragment your attention, and ignoring sleep literally prevents your brain from organizing all those new memories overnight. But listen, the absolute biggest trap here is number 5, avoiding self-testing. Testing reveals the actual gaps in your knowledge, and frankly, finding out you don't know something hurts the ego. So what do students do? They stay in safe mode, just rereading. But actively avoiding that discomfort is the exact thing keeping you stuck. Which brings us to the core solution, part 4, the Genius Study System. It is time to shift out of frustration and into empowerment. Here is the highly structured 4-step system used by top-performing students. First up, clarify exactly what you need to learn so you don't waste precious time on low-value material. Second, break that info down into small chunks. Seriously, if you can't explain a chunk simply, it's just too big. Third, study actively. Close the book and explain the concept out loud in your own words. And fourth, test, review, and space it out. Notice how breaking things into chunks and actively engaging totally replaces the need to rely on some endless well of motivation. You don't need to be perfectly motivated, you just rely on the system instead. That fourth step relies on what is arguably the most powerful tool in the entire book: spaced repetition. It literally means reviewing information right on the absolute edge of forgetting it. Cramming creates this sort of temporary, flimsy familiarity, but spacing out your reviews, that gives your brain the exact amount of time it needs to consolidate that information into durable, rock-solid long-term memory. And this brilliantly illustrates how it works. You don't actually need to review every single day. The ideal pattern goes like this. On day 1, you learn and you test. On day 2, you do a really short review. Then you skip a day. On day 4, test yourself again. Skip a few more days, and on day 7, you do a final review. This exact spacing pattern is the secret sauce. It's how geniuses retain information for months, rather than forgetting it the very minute they walk out of the exam room. Okay, finally, part 5, your 7-day reset plan. Knowing all these techniques is completely useless without actual behavior change. So here is your action plan to break those old, ineffective habits. Day 1 is purely about self-awareness. Just diagnose what you are currently doing. No judgment, just observe. Day 2 is all about your environment. Remove distractions at the source before you even sit down. Seriously, put the phone in another room. Day 3 is the big pivot. Switch entirely to active study. No more rereading. You read, you close the book, and you recall. These first 3 days prep your environment and your mind before you even attempt deep learning. Moving into the rest of the week, on day 4, you introduce testing. And remember, testing is just providing necessary feedback. It is not a final judgment on your intelligence. Day 5 is when you apply that spaced review pattern we just talked about. On day 6, simulate real conditions. No phone, limited time, you are training yourself to execute calmly under pressure. And day 7 is absolutely crucial. You build your identity. You literally tell yourself, out loud, I am someone who studies actively. Integrating this new identity is what actually stabilizes these habits for the long haul. Now, as you go through this reset, you are definitely going to feel some friction. It's not going to be easy right away, but I really want you to remember this exact quote from the source text. That uncomfortable feeling, that's not failure, that's your brain getting stronger. We have to fundamentally reframe how we define struggle. When trying to recall an answer feels hard, that is actually the biological requirement for building a memory. If it's too easy, you simply aren't learning. So, what does this all mean for you? Well, you now know exactly why the old ways of passive reading and cramming just don't work. You've got the 4-step system and the 7-day reset plan laid out right in front of you. The only thing left to answer is, are you ready to actually change how you learn? Let that sink in for a minute and maybe try applying this system today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.